great to be here. Good morning, everybody. Thanks for coming on a cold Monday morning, right? Yeah, Saturday was a little bit rough. I was up here. Yeah? But it didn't snow, so that's a good thing, right?
Right.
It didn't snow. So, all right, so this is number 6 for me, in case you didn't know. It's not like I'm keeping track or anything, but right, it's number 6 for me. And President Baxter, you had this wonderful, this is what we're going to do. We're going to go to Paris, and we're going to do the thing. We're going to eat baguettes, and we're going to do, right? That's what we're going to do. So when Martha comes to me, and she says, all right, well, we need to do this, you need to do the thing. I said, okay, well, send me an itinerary for the thing. So I get the itinerary, and, I'm a medievalist. Right? I mean, think about this for a minute. I'm like, what am I going to do? Right? What do I do here? What do I do? Yeah, I'm thinking, okay, I'm looking at this itinerary, and I had completely forgotten you guys are going to Normandy, that you had the Normandy add-on, right? I completely forgot that. So I got to go to my map. President Baxter knows I'm a map guy. So I'm thinking, okay, I'm looking at the itinerary and I'm looking at the map and I'm thinking, what can I do? What can I do to lead this thing off? I mean, that's a huge palette, right? That's a great canvas. There's all kinds of stuff. And you guys are going to basically work your ways, from south to north. So I'm looking at it and I'm thinking about it. I'm like, well, what can we do? So, well, what if I were to do something with Roman Gaul, the south of France, and you've got the Romans that are there, and you got all of that to go to. We can talk about Gallo-Roman Gaul, and we can talk about the power of Roman influence. And let's do this. That would be cool. There's our Roman province. All right? It's there. Well, let's stay in the south. Again, I completely forgot the whole Normandy World War II thing. And I notice on the itinerary that you're going to make a stop in Avignon. Uh-oh. Right? So now the wheels get turning. Because this is my thing. Arguably the first medieval history book that I ever read had a big old huge chapter on the Avignon papacy. Anybody read Barbara Tuchman's A Distant Mirror? Published in 1978. That tells you how old I am. Published in 1978. A Distant Mirror. You know what the subtitle is? The Calamitous 14th Century. Oh. Calamity! I don't know, maybe that's why I was drawn to it. Maybe so. Wait, you're going to Avignon. Okay. Hold on a minute. So now I go and we look at our map of Europe in 1328. Everybody come all the way down south. You got the Kingdom of France, and you come all the way down and next to it, where that map says small states, really what we're looking at is the Holy Roman Empire. And if you look all the way down there, right, just northwest of Marseille, you see there's this little pink blot. Does anybody see that little pink blotch there? That pink is the same as the whatever, pink, purple, whatever it is of the Papal States. You see that? The papacy has this little neighborhood in what we think of as southern France, right? It was essentially given to them. They were given an estate. We'll see how that happens and how it expands. That's a papal property that's in the middle of this region that has France on one side and has the Holy Roman Empire on the other. And you guys are going to it. And I said, okay, all right. Now I think we're zoning in. The Languedoc. The Languedoc. There in the south, again, take a look at that map. It gets a little bit harder, comes out of a book. Right? But you can see there's Avignon. Now we're all the way down in the south. And I'm thinking, okay, you guys are not going to spend a huge amount of time in the South. You're going to be working your way. You got this thing, and you're going to wind up in Paris. But there's a story to tell here. About a place and a time of incredible significance in this little town of Avignon. And so I thought, well, by golly, that's where we're going to go. And we're going to take a few minutes to look at and to think about and to help try to contextualize what you are going to see in a place that for almost 100 years was the home of the papacy. As a result of it, its reputation suffered mightily. But man, it was an administrative machine. It was a financial and a judicial and in many ways a theological juggernaut for the better part of a century that absolutely drove the train of Western Christendom. Part of its popular lack of support was the fact that it was so good at doing what it did. And Rome suffered. Can you imagine a moment when St. Peter's has no roof, where it is exposed to the weather and the birds and the stuff that happened? It's a powerful moment. And it's one that's significant. And as I was thinking about where you're going and the journey you're taking, I was also thinking about what I often talk to my students about. And that is that all of the boxes that we create to manage history are just that. They are boxes. They are constructs that we create. And so what I want to invite you to do over the next few minutes is to think about breaking down the boxes between medieval and modern, between medieval and Renaissance, medieval and early modern, to kind of think about and be open to the question. When we go to Avignon and you walk down those streets and you think about what was, are we on a road to modernity? Well, let's think about that. So where does the story begin? Well, here's where the story really begins, right? Over the course of the 13th century, the papacy and the church, in terms of its government and administrative mechanisms, it became incredibly professional, very effective, very efficient. And as it did so, it became less popular. The crisis that gets us to the Avignon papacy was actually one involving Pope Boniface VIII and Philip the Fair, King of France. Boniface VIII was Bishop of Rome from 1294 to 1303. He was not a pious man. He was not a humble man. He was a career lawyer and a politician. He was good at what he did. And over the course of his papacy, there were two moments of crisis that he had to deal with. One had to do with taxation, clerical taxation. You see, if you remember, one of the things that made this 14th century calamitous was that England and France go to war. You all remember the 100 Years' War? Yes? Mm-hmm. Yes. Okay. The French and the English are getting ready to go to war. Which means if you're going to go to war, you got to have money. And so both in England and in France, the kings decide that what they're going to do is they're going to start taxing their clergy. Taxing the clergy. Boniface, who is a product of a papacy that spent much of the last century and a half, basically establishing that nobody taxes, nobody touches the clergy but Rome. Boniface says, no, you can't do that. You ain't taxing my people. I'll tax them, thank you very much. He issues a papal bull, Clericis Laicos. He says, you can't do it. The King of England and the King of France, you want to bet? And they turn up the heat. And they actually force Boniface to back down. They quietly work out a deal. The church begins to make the payments. And then the real problem. This has to do with France. Remember our map. Philip IV has decided that he has a problem. In the Bishop of Famay, a man by the name of Bernard Sassé, and it is his intention to arrest that bishop and put him on trial for treason. Boniface says no. Clergy will not be subject to the courts of a secular ruler. In fact, Boniface goes further and he issues a bull, Unam Sanctum. And in that bull, he basically says, everybody, to reinforce what's been going on for over a century coming out of Rome. Everybody, including the king, including the prince, including the emperor, everybody is subject to Rome. You are a secular ruler and you will not put my bishop on trial. And he can't back down. No, he can't back down. Philip, who at this point is feeling it. An old professor of mine said, France during the reign of Philip the Fair, you are essentially dealing with what's called proto-nationalism. It's got all kinds of stuff about notions of rallying around the crown, rallying around France, not even the person of the king. He's got an entire propaganda campaign breaks loose in France. Philip says, okay, here's what we're going to do. Not only do I not recognize the legitimacy of Unam Sanctum, I don't recognize the legitimacy of you. Henceforth, here's what I'm doing. I'm sending a team of my people and one of my ministers, and we're going to arrest you, bring you back to Paris, and put you on trial for heresy. He sends one of his ministers. They land in a little town of Anagni. They break into the Pope's house. That's where Boniface was at. Rough him up pretty good. There's this thing, did they beat him? Not sure. All I know is that Boniface never recovered from whatever it was that was done when they arrested him. In fact, the people of the town rescued Boniface. We have a problem. Rome has a problem with the King of France. Boniface did not recover. And when he passed, there erupted in the College of Cardinals, the body that elects the Pope, a real debate. What do we do? Well, as something of a compromise, they elected Bertrand de God, Clement V. Right? Clement was not an insider, wasn't even a cardinal. He was from the south of France, and that was a virtue at the time. He hoped to have a coronation in Italy. But again, things are very unstable. We don't have time to go into it, but there's a lot of instability in the Italian peninsula. He simply can't do it. That is not uncommon during the Middle Ages for popes to not be hanging out in Rome, to not be able to be in Rome. It is not uncommon. So he's from the south of France. He says, okay, well, I'm just going to hang out here. Aquitaine, Bordeaux. It's not until 1309 that he says, okay, I'm settling the curia, the papal curia in Avignon. That's where we're going to settle. We got an estate, we're going to settle there. He's not intending to forever and anon be in France. But he settles in Avignon. And the other thing that he does is he begins to staff the College of Cardinals with Frenchmen from the south, kindred spirits, 23 in all. This is something popes do, right? 23 in all. What our friend Clement started was what, a 70, 80-year run in which you have 7 popes in a row resident in Avignon. We're not going to talk about all of them. We don't have time. I just want to point out a couple of them to you. One that I'd like to point out and talk a little bit about is Benedict XII, because you're going to go there and you're going to see, and one of the big things you're going to look at is the papal palace. Well, Benedict XII was a Cistercian monk. He studied at the Cistercian College of St. Bernard. He got his doctorate in Paris. He was an inquisitor. He was the last great inquisitor of the Cathar heretics. So he's tough. Austere man. You know, he's a monk. He was a monk first. And when he became pope, one of the things that he was absolutely, vehemently, passionately opposed to was nepotism. Here's what he said, quote, "The pope should have no father, no mother, no genealogy." He was an active reformer. And he wanted to go back to Rome. But again, and this is like a broken record, the political and the military situation in Italy simply did not allow him to do that. But he planned it. One of the things he intended to do and had done, he had the hole in the roof of St. Peter's repaired. He's going to go home. But at the same time, he started construction on the papal palace. He had the first section of it built. Why? Because he needed security. He needed a place that wasn't borrowed. He needed a place that was his where the curia can function. He needed a fortress. In 1339, he had the papal archives brought to Avignon. And you know where they were? Here's the thing you got to keep in mind. They weren't in Rome. They were in Assisi. Wasn't safe. Had them brought to Rome. This photograph is of the cloister. You guys will see it. You notice how that looks like a medieval fortress? He needed a spot he could defend because he never knew when the Holy Roman Emperor was going to come and pay a visit. So he needed a fortress. That's what they built it. In 1342, Pierre Roger became Pope Clement VI. He was Pope from 1342 to 1352. He's known as Clement the Magnificent. Clement humbly declared, "My predecessors did not know how to be the Pope," which means he does. Let's talk about Clement VI. Under Clement VI, Avignon becomes a royal capital. His attitude, his outlook, his resources, he's a wealthy man. He's got that mentality of a king. He was a Benedictine monk. He earned doctorates in both theology and canon law. In the Middle Ages, that's always a dangerous thing when you have both. He served as an abbot, he served as a bishop, he served as an archbishop. He was a chancellor and a chief minister to the French king. He's a close friend. Now he's from Aquitaine. But he built his career in the north. He built his career in Royal Normandy and in France and in Paris. That's where he built his career. He was in his early 50s when he became Pope. I got to share this with you, okay? So when you go and you're walking through the new palace, his section that he built, I want you to think about this. He was consecrated on May 19, 1342. Two members of the French royal family, John the Duke of Normandy and Eudes, Duke of Burgundy, are standing on either side of his horse. And they each have the horse by the bridle on each side. And they're leading him in. This particular format, the nobles on either side of the horse, they got the bridle, the guy's on the horse. That stuff is reserved for the emperor. That's how he's rolling in. We have the records of the coronation banquet. There were 3,000 guests. The menu included over 1,000 sheep, 118 cattle, 101 calves, 914 kids, 60 pigs, 10,471 chickens, 1,400 geese, 300 pike, 48,000 assorted cheeses, 50,000 tarts, and 200 casks of wine. And it was all consumed. A good time was had by all. By God. His court came to give Philip's court in Paris a run for its money. This man was not satisfied with a cloister turned into a fort. So he added the southern half, the Palais Neuf. It's got everything you would expect. You'll see it. The great audience halls, it's got the chambers. I would invite those of you that are going to pay attention to the stag room. If you get in, go to the stag room. That's part of his personal residency quarters. Go to the stag room. Chapels. It's the stuff of a palace. But he was committed. You know, I say that kind of, snidely and as if, how could he be the Pope? And he was really committed. A couple of things you need to be aware of. He's the Pope when the plague arrives. 1348, Black Death, all that. You guys remember that? Yeah? You've heard of that. He really was courageous during that time. Half the population of Avignon died. Half in the first wave. The outskirts, as he built all of this and as he built it up, poor folk had to move out. They had to go out. Think about your map of Avignon. They had to move out. Those folks got depopulated. I don't know if you guys are going to see it, but if you're out and about, ask your guide if they can show you the chunk of the plague wall. For the most part, it looks like gravel, but they literally built a wall that was a guarded wall out to try to keep people from coming in. Clement was committed. I mean, his physician basically ordered him to at all times sit between two roaring fires to try to keep him from getting the disease. He survived it. But you got to know he used his own money to pay for the establishment of cemeteries. And here's something else. We all know that during the plague, there was a tremendous wave of anti-Semitism and scapegoatism, and Clement opened the city to Jewish refugees. About 200 families. Clement's big issues were what all Avignon popes' big issues were. What to do about papal lands in Italy, right? Everybody heard that, they need to go home, they need to go home, they need to be back in Italy. But the political situation, the tensions between the Holy Roman Empire, the Italian factions, it was incredibly difficult to navigate. That was an ongoing problem. Before becoming Pope, Clement had worked 8 years on the English-French problem. And that was a priority. And then, of course, there's Holy War. There's crusade against the infidel. He helped to pay for Papal expeditions. One in 1344 captured Smyrna. He declared himself the leader of Christendom against the infidel. A European power, a global power. There were 7 all total. Who brought them home? Gregory XI, a nephew of Clement's. He was determined that the papacy needed to go home. His predecessors, he assumes the papacy in 1370. His predecessors had done a lot of hard work in terms of pacifying Italy, trying to create a landscape of stability that would allow for the papacy to go home. He was committed. In 1377, he packed everybody up and he went back to Rome. It's over, it's done. Thank you. And then he goes back to Rome, and he goes and he gets malaria and he dies. Well, long story short, don't have time. We'd be here until next week. Remember that cardinal, that College of Cardinals? Lots of French, a lot of Italians. Stuff breaks. French cardinals go back to Avignon, elect themselves a French pope. Italian cardinals stay in Rome, support an Italian pope, and guess what we got? We got us a great schism. We don't got us one pope anymore, we got 2. And before this gets taken care of, we're going to have 3. We're going to have 3. This will take until the middle of the 15th century to get straight. And the damage done to the reputation and the standing of the papacy, you thought it was bad during Avignon? This is really tough. 3 popes before it's all said and done. You know, throughout all of this, there were lots of critics. Dante, perhaps you've heard of him, Francesco Petrarch, and Catherine of Siena. Well, probably when you were in school, you had to read bits and pieces of Dante's comedy, right? Well, you know, since I was asked, you have to have a reading. Canto 19. You remember the whole thing. Dante and Virgil are going down through hell, and you got all these levels to hell. You remember this? Got all the levels of hell. Level 8 is for the fraudulence. It goes down, what is that, third kind of little cliff thing, 4th. There are these folks that are in these holes and their feet are sticking out. And their feet are on fire. And you imagine that would be a pretty miserable way to go about your existence, with you're in the hole with the feet. Well, you know who that is. That's Pope Nicholas III. Dante and Virgil are going down. He's talking to the feet. Starts a conversation with them. And I'm going to pick up in the middle of it. The entire canto is brilliant. I mean, the entire thing is brilliant, but 19 is really good. Let me pick up. So I've started this conversation. Nicholas was in the hole, says, well, then what is it that you want of me? If you care so much to know who I am, that you come down the bank to find this out, you might as well know I wore the great mantle. And as an Orsini, a true son of the she-bear, I was so eager to profit my cubs that I lined pockets there as I lined this one here. Beneath my head are all the other popes who preceded me in simony. Does everybody know what simony is? Paying for offices. You got to make money. Somehow. This is a thing in Avignon. They don't have access to the papal states. You got to generate revenue. One of the ways you're going to do that has to do with gifts coming in order to secure a position. Technically, it was a gift. Okay?
Right.
Right. Okay. I lined pockets there as I lined this one. Beneath my head are all the other popes who preceded me in simony. One of the great criticisms of the late medieval papacy. Mashed out into fissures deep in the rock. I will be thrust down there in succession when that one comes who I thought you were. You see, when Dante first shows up, he says, "What are you doing here already, Boniface? Boniface, the eighth, Boniface. I will be thrust down there in succession when the one comes who I thought you were," when suddenly I blurted out my question. "But I have already cooked my feet longer suspended in this upside down position than he will stay planted with his feet aglow." Here we go. Now we go to Avignon. "For after him will come from the west of France a lawless shepherd, even more loathsome, one worthy to cover both him and me. He will be a new Jason, like the one we read in Maccabees, whose king was so easily led, and he will find the French king equally pliant." Clement, the simoniac. He wrote a letter. Let's see if I can get this to you. It's a letter that Dante wrote to the Italian cardinals. I just want to read part of the opening. "How does this city sit solitary that was full of people? She's become as a widow that was great among the nations. The greed of the leaders of the Pharisees, which made the ancient priesthood abominable, not only transferred the ministry to the offspring of Levi, but also caused the siege and ruin of David's chosen city." You know what he's talking about. He's talking about Rome and the sons of Levi and the French and all that. "The only eternal one, seeing this from his lofty watchtower, impressed his order by means of the Holy Spirit on a mind worthy of God, on a prophet. And we grieve to see Rome thus confess the same Father and Son, the same God and man, the same Mother and Virgin, on account of whom and for whose salvation the question concerning charity was repeated 3 times, 'Peter, feed my sheep.'" After so many glorious triumphs, Christ confirmed Rome by word and deed to be the ruler of the world. Peter and Paul, preacher to the Gentiles, consecrated the city as the apostolic see with their blood. Now Rome is a widow. She is deserted, and we are forced to lament. No fan. And then there's Francesco Petrarch. He's the one who actually coined the phrase Babylonian captivity, referring to Avignon as the Babylon to the west, the Babylon of the West. Let me read something to you. Let's see if I got it right. Listen to what he says. This is a letter that Francesco Petrarch wrote to the Bishop of Padua. "When I consider taking up the pen and writing about the condition of this Western Babylon," Avignon, "where on account of either my fate, or more truly my sins, I have unwillingly lived," we'll talk about that, "I fear, Father, that not only may I increase my sorrow by my lamentations and unseasonable and useless complaints, but also I may disturb your holy cares. In brief, know that not only my pen, but even the pen of Cicero is unequal to the task of describing Babylon on the Rhone. Whatever you have heard of the Assyrian or Egyptian Babylon, whatever of the 4 labyrinths, whatever of the entrance to Avernus, of the Tartarian forests, or of the sulfurous swamps, it is a fable in comparison with this hell." He's talking about Avignon. This hell. Wow. "Here reigns Nimrod, builder of towers, and at the same time father of fear." And then he goes on listing these folks. Here you can see whatever confusion, whatever darkness, whatever horror can exist or even be imagined. You have ever been happy because of your goodness. Now you are happier because you are not here. He's talking about Avignon. And then there's Catherine of Siena. She's got a different vibe, right? She apparently had a relationship. She had great standing and had a good relationship with Gregory the 11th. And she wrote him. She wrote him. This is letter number 31. Here's what she says. Now remember, Gregory the 11th, he's going to take everybody home. Do not let any scandals or rebellions of cities that you may hear of prevent your holy desire. Be inflamed to do what you wish. Do not believe the devil who foresees his own danger and applies himself to trouble you, so that you lose your love and charity and may not return to Rome. I tell you, Father, in Christ Jesus, come like a gentle lamb and answer the Holy Spirit who calls you. Come, come, do not delay for time does not wait on you. If you come, you will do as the lamb whom you replace. Without weapons, he slew our foes, coming in gentleness, employing only the weapons of love, caring only for spiritual things, and returning grace to man who had lost it by sin. Come home. And he did. So, the question that I've asked you to think about is, does this touch on this notion of the road to modernity? There are lots of scholars that look at it, and you can talk about a lot of different things. You can talk about the geography, right? That you've got to shift. Their interests and concerns are now, England and France and the empire, and they're moving this way, which becomes kind of a hallmark. You can talk about papal administration, canon law, revenue. Yes, it was a machine. Remember, in the Middle Ages, law equals money. If you control the court, you control a revenue stream, right? Are we looking at the birth of diplomacy? Middle of the 14th century in Italy, you are. Look where they're engaged. Italy, dealing with Islam, Crusades, the 100 Years' War, the Holy Roman Empire. Critics and reformers of Avignon, their voices will echo straight through to Wittenberg and beyond. If anybody's interested, Steve Osment's Age of Reform. You know when he starts? 1250. Right? All of those criticisms, all of the things that people saw that were wrong with Avignon just continue to ripple right on through. Okay. What do you think? Well, Johann Huizinga wrote a book, Dutch historian. The title, when it was translated into English, was The Waning of the Middle Ages. The second edition, they redid the translation, called it The Autumn of the Middle Ages. Here was in the 14th century, all of this stuff that was medieval European that was in decay. It's collapsing. Perhaps it's in the process of becoming. The way I was taught, think of it as transformation. Going somewhere. And I think that in terms of seeing perhaps the road to modernity, maybe not even being fully on it, but seeing the road, the place you want to look is not so much this stuff, but a cultural mark. Let me take you back to Francesco Petrarch, who just lambasted Avignon. Here's the thing you got to know about Francesco Petrarch. In a lot of ways, he's a child of Avignon. His dad moved the family there. Petrarch arrived in Avignon when he was 10. He was educated just outside of the city itself, loved the countryside, was really influenced by Provençal culture and landscapes. If you read his poetry, before you go, read his lyrical poetry. And all of the stuff where he describes things in nature, that's Provençal. Loved it. He studied law in Montpellier, then at Bologna, because his dad wanted him to. And then once his dad died, he went back to Avignon. And guess what? He started an ecclesiastical career. He began to accept ecclesiastical offices and titles and work because it had a paycheck. He's a boy of Avignon. But having that paycheck and not really having to work, because he's got the thing and he's in the minor order, it allowed him to do what he loved best, and that was to study Latin literature, and in particular, Virgil. And we're on a road. He became the private chaplain to Cardinal Giovanni Colonna, one of the most powerful and wealthiest cardinals in Avignon. Colonna, oh, by the way, that's the family that Philip the Fair had a minister. Remember the minister who goes down and he beats up Boniface VIII? A Colonna man. No small irony there. Giovanni Colonna becomes his patron, and that allows Francesco Petrarch a life of leisure to read, to study, to write poetry, to write letters, to travel. He's a child of Avignon. When he was introduced to me, he was introduced to me as the father of Renaissance humanism. When you go to Avignon and you look out of the city, 30 miles off in the distance is a mountain. Stands 6 feet tall, 6,000 feet tall. Mount Ventoux. As a young man, Petrarch climbed that mountain. And because he was a letter writer, he wrote about his experience to a friend and confessor named Dionisio. The letter is called The Ascent of Mount Ventoux. It is the first fundamental text that outlines and defines the notion of a Renaissance humanism. Why? Let me read you the first 2 sentences. In his letter to Dionisio, "Today I made the ascent of the highest mountain in this region, 30 miles outside of Avignon. It is not improperly called Ventosum." Here it is. Everybody stop and listen. "My only motive was the wish to see what so great an elevation has to offer." He didn't go up there to get right with God. He didn't go up there to see anything having to do with Jesus. He went up there because he wanted to see what it looked like from the top. It was his personal ambition. "The idea," he writes, "took hold of me with special force when in rereading Livy's History of Rome." Livy, the Latin classics. "I happened on the place where Philip of Macedon ascended Mount Hymus in Thessaly, and from whose summit he was able to see 2 seas. I climbed the mountain because I wanted to see what it looked like from the top." He, as a personal ambition, as a personal desire, wanted to see what the world looked like from the top of the mountain. Why does the medieval Christian mystic climb the mountain? To engage God. Why does he climb the mountain? Because I want to. You see the difference? But here's the thing. When it was described to me as a student, he said, my professor said, you need to understand that we're in that flex between what we call medieval and modern. He climbs the mountain because he wants to climb the mountain, but our friend Petrarch does something else. He gets up to the top of the mountain and he pulls out a book, which he had a habit of doing, had a habit of taking books with him. He pulls out a book, and the book that he pulled out was Augustine's Confessions. And Augustine is such a huge factor in understanding medieval European, medieval Western Christian spirituality in the Middle Ages. And he says, I just happened to open it. I opened it, reading whatever came to hand. And it took him to book 10. And Augustine wrote, quote, and men go about to wonder at the heights of mountains, and the mighty waves of the sea, and the wide sweep of rivers, and the circuit of the ocean, and the revolution of the stars, but they themselves consider not. So in other words, at that moment, he opens up Confessions, and he feels guilty about the fact that he climbed the mountain in order to see the top. He's not worked it out. He does. Read his letter to posterity. There are a couple other things. One other thing you need to remember about him and about Avignon. If you remember in school and you read any of his poetry, there was a particular person who was a subject to over 360 poems and a whole bunch of letters. A woman by the name of Laura. An idealized love. He was captivated by Laura. We think her name is actually Laura Nall, a resident of Avignon. Reportedly, he saw her for the first time at the Church of St. Clare on Good Friday in Avignon in 1327. The church no longer stands, but if you go to 22 Rue Roi René, there is a plaque. Here in the 14th century stood a church where Petrarch saw Laura for the first time. And in his edition of Virgil, which he carried with him all the time, here's what he wrote about Laura, a resident and native of Avignon. From the morning of that brief encounter, I entered that labyrinth from which I think there is no way out. Avignon. One last thing that points to the road to modernity. He was friends and had encounters with our friend Petrarch, a Sienese master painter by the name of Simone Martini, who died in 1344. He studied under Duccio. He was a colleague and worked with Giotto. He was a master of international Gothic. I want you to look. This is an illustration that he did, that Martini did, for Petrarch's copy of Virgil. I want you to look at their faces. Don't worry about this, the body still being kind of weird in the background and all of that. I want you to look at their faces. I think it reflects, to me at any rate, the influence of Giotto. Because that transition in terms of painting, as we move from that kind of abstraction of medieval art and medieval painting to Renaissance art, one of the things that happens is you get the rediscovery of naturalism and realism, and one of the first places you see it is in their face. Look at the face. It's the road. For those of you that are going, go to the cathedral and pay attention to the narthex porch. Martini did a fresco The fresco's gone. What's left of the fresco is in the consistory in Rome. But when they removed it, you see the little red chalky outline? He put that on the stone first. And so as this whole kind of process of trying to preserve what was left done, drawings were made that made their way to the Vatican that shows you what's going on in this composition. You've got Christ in glory up at the top, and then you have the Virgin basically receiving the church, the cathedral church. Take a look at the face of Jesus. We're not there, but we may be on the road. And I would argue that you are. So understand Avignon for what it is. In many ways, the zenith of much of what we think of as medieval. But do not underestimate what's happening. And when a man like Petrarch, the father of Renaissance humanism, writes a seminal piece about his journey to the top of a mountain 30 miles north of the city. He may well have hated it, and he did. He left in 1353 and never went back. But it was fundamental to who he was. And in Avignon, with all of his stuff and all of his baggage, if you look, you can see that road. Have a great time. Thank you all very much.